Olá, TUTAMÉIA está ao vivo. E antes de mais nada, nós queremos lhe fazer um convite, uma proposta. Vacine-se, leve seus filhos, saiba como é o calendário nacional de vacinação. É essencial que as crianças, os jovens se vacinem, mas também adultos e maiores de idade precisam buscar essa proteção. Vacine-se, defenda a vida e o SUS. Estamos nós aqui nos nossos estúdios domésticos, a Eleonora.
O Rodolfo.
E do outro lado da tela, conversa conosco hoje, desde lá, os Estados Unidos, desde Atlanta, Ilisse Cohen, do movimento Vozes Judaicas pela Paz, que a Eleonora agora apresenta com mais detalhes e inicia essa nossa conversa de fim de tarde e início de noite aqui. Eleonora.
Ilisse Cohen, thank you so much for joining us. I will introduce you in Portuguese and then we will talk in English. Ilisse Cohen é uma doutora em antropologia pós-colonial, uma militante do movimento dos judeus pela paz, dirigente desse movimento. É uma militante em várias, sua trajetória é imensa, em várias organizações e grupos em defesa da paz, em defesa, enfim, do exercício livre da paz. I would like to ask you, can you tell us more about your movement? What does it mean and why you engage in this movement?
So, but before you answer this, we'll show, nós vamos mostrar para vocês uma das ações desse movimento da qual a Ilisse participa, que é o Vozes Judaicas pela Paz. Foi uma ação realizada anteontem em Washington. É um vídeo rápido que resume um pouco desse trabalho. E logo depois ela entra contando tudo para nós. Desculpe nossa falha. Entrou a foto em vez do vídeo.
400 American Jews marked Netanyahu's arrival with a sit-in at Congress, calling on Biden and Congress to stop arming the Israeli military as it wages genocide in Gaza. Our rabbis, our students, anti-Zionist Israelis, and descendants of Holocaust survivors were arrested in prayerful civil disobedience, demanding that the U.S. enact an immediate weapons embargo on the Israeli government. This cannot continue. We refuse to sit by as our government facilitates and defends these atrocities. As the Israeli military's genocide against Palestinians in Gaza escalates,
this is your first warning to include those on the second floor.
So too will our resolve and commitment to stand with Palestinians. We continue to demand, stop arming Israel.
So, tell us about this movement.
Yeah, thank you so much for showing that. It's very moving, actually, to see it. Not having been there and seeing that how many Jewish people really are standing up at this moment and are recognizing the brutality both of the Israeli government, but also of the U.S. support of this genocide. When I think about this movement, I think about all the years, the decades all the people before us who've been working on this I've been working on it for 30 something years, but there were people before me who were working on it and who were trying to talk about the Israeli occupation and who tried to talk about the Nakba and this moment in time with the genocide. It really is, I I just can't, I think like many of us, we just can't find the words. There's no more words to say. It's outrageous. It's unbelievable. It's shocking. We've all tried to say exactly what we meant, what we've said, that this doesn't protect Palestinians. Clearly, it doesn't protect Jewish people, that anti-Semitism is being weaponized in the middle of it. People are being shut down for actually speaking out for Palestinian lives. And what we're asking is for the US government to stop supporting this genocide, to stop arming Israel immediately. And we've seen over and over, even as people ask for these, for the ceasefire, and even when it was on the brink of a ceasefire, that clearly the Israeli government and Netanyahu did not want to enter into that. And Israelis are saying that, and the families of hostages are saying it. Clearly, Palestinians are saying it. We're all saying it here in the US and around the world, globally, we're seeing that. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what to say at this moment, other than, we have every international body that's been communicating about how horrific this moment is, and then leaning on the context of the occupation. Now that the ICJ, International Court of Justice, has said that the occupation is illegal. We know that that's been the case, but now that the highest court in the world has said that the ICC, or International Criminal Court, has called Netanyahu a war criminal, or put out an arrest for his warrant, or issuing that, it's surprising to me that people did not try to arrest him or try to keep him contained in a citizen's arrest, not allow him to do one more thing. It's really the heart. As an activist for this long on this issue, as a scholar activist, it's always important to also recognize how far we've moved. And that at this moment in time, when I think back 30 years ago, how hard it was to even say the word Palestine, how hard it was to even recognize that there was an expulsion of Palestinians. And then this moment in time, so horrific, where the entire world, the entire global human world, is seeing exactly what's happening and asking for it to stop, begging, demanding, acting in ways that people are willing to put their bodies on the line. People are willing to put their jobs on the line. People are willing to do just about everything to try and stop it in all these nonviolent ways, and still not feeling like we're being heard, while the momentum is clear, like there's no going back. Palestine is going to be free, and Jewish people are going to be a part of that.
Just before I continue, you said you've been an activist for the Palestinian cause, for the peace cause for more than 30 years, and it was even more difficult at that time than today. And so, what drove you to this? How did you decide to engage in this struggle?
So I'll try to do the shortest version of that, but I grew up in a Jewish community. I'm a Sephardic Jew, so my family is were part of the Jewish people who were kicked out of Spain in the 1400s, and then ended up in the Middle East. So even my ancestry and my history, it's very clear that whenever is that my group of people has always lived amongst Middle Easterners, amongst Muslims and Christians, and multi-faith, multi-ethnic, multiracial communities. And I was raised with that, but I also was raised in a Jewish day school that was Orthodox and Ashkenazi, meaning European Jewish, that tried to convince me that Israel was my home, even though the homelands that my family connected to were actually the Isle of Rhodes and what is now modern day Turkey. And when I went to Israel for the first time for a high school program, I was told by our teachers not to go into the Arab Quarter in Jerusalem. And it was right as the first Intifada, or Palestinian uprising, was starting. And as that was happening, as a high school student where I hated to talk in class, I got really scared to speak. And I just said, why are you telling us not to go into the Arab Quarter? And who are the Palestinians? Who are the Arabs? And it was met with absolute silence. And in the Jewish community, to meet a question of a young person with absolute silence is one of those moments that you're wondering, how on earth did that happen? That to be met with silence is the exact opposite of what the Jewish community does in terms of asking questions and being able to investigate further and understand more deeply. And that inside my soul really scared me. And I could feel something inside that I was not getting all the information. And then I actually was supposed to return. I was supposed to go to Colombia, South America, to study Spanish for my junior year in university. And the university said, we're closing the program. It's too dangerous in Colombia, but you can choose somewhere else. And my only other option to studying Hebrew, to studying another language and doing it that quickly was Hebrew, because I already knew it from Jewish day school. So I went to Hebrew University, and 2 days after going to Hebrew University, Iraq invaded Kuwait. There were threats to begin the first Gulf War. As Jewish students, we were given Gulf War preparation boxes, what to do, how to tape our rooms if there was chemical war, what we should do if we can feel chemical warfare on us, while our Palestinian counterparts were given nothing. They were literally left alone, and we were side by side in university. And also at that time, I had a professor. I happened to take a class on international law and human rights, and I had never known anything about international law and human rights, never learned anything in school and university. And it was with an Israeli professor who was also one of the founders of B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, later. And she was teaching us about international humanitarian law and human rights. And the case study was the occupied territories. And all of a sudden, as a Jewish person, I was like, how on earth are we not taught this? How are we taught to just be focused on Israel as this wonderful place that saved Jews, but was actually occupying another people? And so that was one glimpse into, those are some of the glimpses. And then I got back to the States, and I thought to myself, when I was done with university, I said, I also have to be part of solving the problem. You can talk about it as savior mentality. I'm not sure what, but I was very driven, and I was confused about why my community, Jewish community, would educate us this way. So I bought a one-way ticket, and I started to work with an organization in 48 that called Interns for Peace, where I lived in a Palestinian city in 48, right on the border of the West Bank. And there's an interesting story about this. It's part of the Triangle area. This Triangle area, later I found out the history is that when Jordan and Israel eventually decided or figured out the armistice lines after 1949, the cluster of Palestinian towns and cities in that area that would have been under Jordan at that time was actually split in half, because they were seen as Palestinians who would also revolt. And so it was a way to divide and rule that area. So I lived in one of those Palestinian towns, and I was bringing together Jews and Palestinians inside 48, but I was also connected to Palestinians that were in the West Bank, because I was living in a Palestinian community, and we spent time with their family members in the West Bank, and we had to drive through the West Bank. And I saw the discrepancies between Palestinians in Israel and Jews in Israel. And then I saw the hierarchy of how Sephardic Jews and Mizrahi Jews, Middle Eastern Jews, were being treated versus Ashkenazi Jews and Palestinians. And when you had mixed groups, how they were targeted against one another. And I started to understand that the country was not at all what I had been taught and what I had understood. It was also a hierarchy of all these different classes of Jews, and how the Jews were being pitted against the Palestinians, who were basically being treated in similar ways, or where state violence could affect them in horrible ways. So when I got back to the States after that 2 years of living in Israel doing this kind of work, I thought the first thing I wanted to do was to communicate with my Jewish community and figure out how could I work for an organization and support support changing this. We were always taught to work towards justice, recognize what's going on, move towards something new. And I was met with boycotting almost everything I organized with a Quaker peace organization. I was met with brutality. There were people who would communicate when I would bring Israeli and Palestinians in on tours about house demolitions in Palestine, or rabbis for human rights, or Palestinians that were talking about Gaza, whatever it is, whatever it was, the Jewish community would try to silence it. There was a Palestinian professor, I'll never forget this, who I asked to come in town from Tennessee and worked with a bookstore so that he could put up his family photos of the expulsion. And at the time, I don't even think he used the word Nakba, but it was of his family's expulsion in 1948. Huge pictures put up in the bookstore. And he was going to do a talk. And then a couple weeks later, I was going to lead a discussion about anti-Semitism or something. And part of that was just to make sure that people would just stay calm about hearing a Palestinian voice. And the Jewish community boycotted that bookstore viciously until they made them take this photo exhibit down for 2 weeks. It was such a threat. And this is in the 1990s. So this is not new. The response that the vicious response that both the mainstream Jewish organizations here in the US and the way the Israeli government functions now to try and shut down any kind of critical conversation about recognizing Palestinian rights or any other people's rights that are not part of the ruling elite is ongoing. So I think, and then I started to take delegations to Israel and Palestine with a group now called Eyewitness Palestine, where people met with human rights defenders and nonviolent activists in Palestine and Israel and would come back and be able to share their stories. And all of those things were things that really kept driving me. Every time I spent time there, every time I met activists, every time they stayed in my home, every time I saw a little bit or experienced a little bit of the brutality on the grounds under the occupation, you know, and I had been to Gaza a few times. And when I think about the decimation, when I think about, and these are just small memories of mine. I also am thinking about the people who are loved ones in my life that are friends who've lost so many family members, or Rifat al-Arir, who was a king in the, like a really huge, enormous motivator and supporter of so many young Gazans to write, and how I met him here, and I was one of the first Jews he met, and that he's, spent time with my family, and that I talked to him on October 3rd, and all these things where I'm like, I just can't, we're in a human world where we live in a world where we want to be connected, and we want to build community, and we want to support each other's dreams and equality, and not to crush people's spirits, not to decimate them and assume that, like, all the racism behind it. It's really, I just talked way too much, but yes, I'll stop there. That's what motivates me.
Great. You are also one of the co-founders of the Atlanta chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace. What is this group? How it was created and why?
So JVP was created in the very late 1990s, and really it was one of the groups that was founded to be able to talk more freely as Jewish people against, to really raise awareness and to talk about how we're going to organize to get rid of the Israeli occupation. It had gone on way too long, the brutality, what people were experiencing. This is actually before the second Intifada began. And I only got involved with JVP. I was living in the Bay Area, and that's the only place that was like in San Francisco, Berkeley area. And while I was there for grad school, I got involved with the chapter, one of the chapters there. And it was really meaningful, since I had been involved with Quaker peace organizations and so many other peace organizations that were, and there wasn't a Jewish group at the time that I could rely on or that really had my voice. And I really feel like JVP at the time was offering those of us who really were anti-occupation, who really wanted to see a change, who wanted to do it in a way where we could be absolutely proud of our Jewish identity and show up as Jewish people. So that's how JVP started. And then when I moved back to the Atlanta area, I really felt like okay, it's a great opportunity to get together with people that I used to do organizing with. And there were a bunch of folks who said, absolutely, let's start an Atlanta JVP chapter. So we did. And it's been amazing to have that kind of community to do that work. I also just want to recognize that, I know that everywhere it's different, in every context, in every state, and specifically in my personal experiences, doing Jewish Voice for Peace work in Atlanta does not necessarily protect you from the Jewish community that makes you start to feel like you are bad people or somehow traitors to Jewish people or traitors to Israel or traitors to the world. But what I did love is that more people came in and really felt like this could be a home for them. And now there's a new iteration, like a new leadership, which is fantastic. And more people are involved and really wanting to find, how are we going to use our voices to end all of this madness?
We are seeing in the demonstration, the past months, that there have been lots of very big demonstrations against genocide, pro-Palestinian people, both in the States and in Europe, and especially in the United Kingdom. We saw enormous demonstrations. In those demonstrations, there are always a moment where people stop, and then come the Jewish delegation with music and they were very welcome to this all this demonstration. I'd like you to tell us what's the importance of the participation of Jewish people in these demonstrations, pro-Palestinian people or against genocide.
I mean, I guess that's a complicated question because it separates out Jewish people from the rest of humanity, as if like all of us as humans should not be a part of demonstrating against what's happening and hoping for a different future for Palestinians. And at the same time, I think it has been really meaningful. I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone into tears where Palestinians will come up to me, local Palestinians, and will say, thank you so much for being here, and then I burst into tears again because I think, why wouldn't I be here? Like, the people who aren't here should feel horrible. Like, I want our world to look different. So I think, but I think because so much of the rhetoric, and this is not new also with this genocide, it's not new to call anti-occupation activists or Jewish people who are saying that, the Nakba happened 75 years ago or 76 years ago, and we need to reckon with that. And Palestinian refugees should be able to return, and all these international laws that should be upheld. I think that Jewish people, that being able to counter this idea that Israel calls itself a Jewish state, which also marginalized the 20% of the Palestinian citizens of Israel. It also occupies the other 7 million Palestinians who live in that area, not including the Palestinians in diaspora, whether in refugee camps or in any places around the world. So this idea that somehow Jewish people should have a voice to counter both the Israeli Jewish narrative that keeps being put out, that Israel is the only safe place for Jews, and what we all feel and see is that has nothing to do with safety. Israel is a state like any other state. If somebody can name a state that actually protects all its citizens, I would love to be in that state, but I don't think there is one. And so Israel being able to use, and frankly, here in the US mainstream organizations who use anti-Semitism as a vehicle to weaponize it to make sure we can't speak about Palestinian rights as if they're keeping us safe, when actually they're aligning with right-wing and nationalist movements. So I think Jewish people showing up in these is one, to show there are Jewish people that are absolutely for Palestinian rights and against what the Israeli government has been doing and is doing now. and that as Jewish people, we have a place within a global movement and connection with other human beings caring about Palestine, and that we want to live in community and not isolated from the rest of the world. 3, that we are not, we do not agree with aligning with right-wing movements, right-wing nationalist movements, anti-Semitic movements, that somehow that will make us more safe if we go ahead and degrade and do what Netanyahu did yesterday, which was spout incredible amounts of Islamophobia, incredible amounts of anti-Palestinian racism, and pure lies.
And what is the impact of these movements in the American society? Because some say that we are seeing the most important manifestation since the Vietnam War. What's the impact? More people are addressing this cause, more people are joining the movement. What do you think about, can you tell us about the impact of all these movements in the American society?
It's such an important question, and really the key of what so many of us are feeling right now, especially with the presidential race and the political moment here. And I think since before Trump had been elected, there was already movement about how do we talk about collective liberation for all. All of us were meeting from all these different movements, and I think at this point, because of this genocide and the U.S. support of it, and how the clampdown and silencing of activists, of students, of people being fired from their jobs, of people not given their contracts for jobs, which I'm an example of that. Every level of society is affected by how people are responding to this genocide. And that to me says it's eroding democratic values when you are not able to speak and be critical of the United States, when you're being told that that you're only aligned with terrorists, or that you're murderers, or that you are traitors if you actually speak up against nationalism and state violence and brutality, and the U.S. funding a genocide. So I think it is a moment where this absolute outpouring of so many people in the United States. I mean, even the polls, the shift that I think there was a poll a few weeks ago where over 51% of the American Jewish community said that they would be willing to consider an arms embargo against Israel. This was a few weeks ago. I mean, that alone is a shift. Now, whether or not everybody's going to come out publicly and say it, but that is an enormous shift to say, break this toxic tie. And that it communicates about every movement. This is specifically about Palestinians, but it really does bleed into every social movement, everything those of us who are part of this movement care about, whether it's climate justice and the climate emergency, whether it's what's happening on our borders with Mexico and asylum seekers, whether it's separating families, it's connected to literally everything. So I think seeing the demonstrations, watching what the students were doing, watching the faculty that were supporting students, people taking risks in ways both in the streets and also in their jobs, who are saying, I don't care. This is why it's so important. If you shut this down, what else are you shutting down? And this comes on the heels of, it was happening as the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism has been, people are trying to legislate it all across the country. And many of us have been fighting it in all of our states. And it also comes at the time that that the right-wing nationalist parties are also, or people are also trying to not allow us to have conversations about critical race theory. Even in my state, we're not allowed to talk in kindergarten through 12th grade. If you're in a public school, you can't teach controversial issues. Everything's controversial. I mean, I don't understand why you as a teacher, right? You can't talk as a teacher about controversial issues. And so, being an educator, I'm an educator on the Middle East, and I suffered for it. There were Jewish parents and mainstream organizations in a school who said, we don't want to do it. We don't want to do it. The impact, if you teach this course, the impact of it could be really big for us. So we'd rather not teach the course in this moment. So it is a moment where this is like the lifeline of, are we really moving toward how we think deeply about democracy, how we think deeply about human rights and justice, or are we moving into a place of silencing and making sure that people go in their silos and just protect themselves? And I think it's clear what the world is saying.
And what is the impact of these movements in the institutional politics? I mean, both parties, Republicans and Democrats, have been supporting the United States official vision of the question, but we saw that in this visit of Netanyahu's, there were some senators from the Democratic Party that said they would stand out.
Yes.
And there are a greater number of members of the parliament that didn't go to the session, and also some like Rashida Tlaib that appeared everywhere. Yes. With this sign saying war criminal, guilty of genocide, criminoso de guerra, culpado de genocídio, durante o discurso de Netanyahu. So, do you think the politics are listening to?
I do. I feel like they have to. I mean, one thing I want to say is I don't understand how courageous and grounded Rashida Tlaib can be. It was also her birthday. That's what she was doing on her birthday. And I think, talk about standing up against the halls of power that are supporting genocide. But yes, to be able to think about, there were over 100 members of Congress actually that did not go, which is amazing. It really is shameful that any of them went. So I want to start there. It's absolutely shameful, but I do want to commend the 100 or so folks who did not go, and that they are clearly speaking out, or knew that it was not in their best interest. I can't say whether or not it's because they're thinking politically or because they actually know that it's the wrong thing to do. But I think, I don't know what to say about, I mean, I really have very little to say about the Republicans, other than I think that they have so aligned within a white nationalist framework and are so dangerous to democracy that I can't really speak to that part. We have to keep fighting that. I think many of us have been in shock for all these months about how the Democratic Party could possibly continue to send military funding and aid and U.S. support to this genocide. I do think, people are saying, was it a break? Because Kamala Harris, who is now, potentially the presidential nominee on the Democratic side. And then we just saw something today where a statement that came out, which could have been written 9 months ago by the Biden administration. And I can't even repeat the words because it made me feel so sad. I think there's a lot of people like the uncommitted movement, where people have been refusing to support Biden in the next elections, is still growing. There's more movements that are growing to say this is a time to pressure Vice President Kamala Harris if she actually is going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. There's still time to change things, as Noura Erakat, who's a Palestinian human rights lawyer who I absolutely think is an incredible person, just talked about how there's still time for the Democratic National Committee to make decisions and put pressure, so that this is the time to really shift. And we're talking about the genocide and ending the genocide. And we're also talking about ending these toxic relationships with Israel. And we're also talking about our democracy. So I think those 100 members who didn't go, members of Congress who didn't go, are some of them are part of the movement of trying to think, how can this be a sea change? What's the possibility here? And that's, all of us are holding on to that. I mean, after Biden stepped down, there are many of us who are like, please let there be, let this be the moment where there's a sea change. I don't know if I answered your question, but I talked.
Yeah, one special point of this movement is the presence of the younger people. We saw, when you saw the pictures, the films, the majority is young people. And why do you believe this cause now? Because when we are young, this is a cause of the leftists, the Palestinian cause, and now this disappears. And now the young people, the younger people, are going to the streets to talk about Palestine. Why this is happening now?
I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything new, but we're seeing genocide on our phones every day. We're witnessing it. People are also, they're connecting the dots. Young people these days are incredibly sophisticated. They get how all the systems work. They can see how they're being silenced by being told that they can't talk about racism. They have seen the murder of George Floyd and so many other Black people in our country, where people go without, with impunity. No one gets punished, or almost no one gets punished, where guns are everywhere, where nobody has to be accountable to the horrible things they do. People running, people who are against protesters literally driving into protesters. I mean, it feels like it's crazy. This is, and they also grew up in the Trump years, where we were separating, the U.S. was separating families, where the Muslim ban, the amount of viciousness and racism and xenophobia and sexism, the Supreme Court getting rid of Roe v. Wade. I mean, these are like outstanding, incomprehensible things happening. And these young people, they've been living in a world where this is what they thought where they lived, and it's not. And they're also watching this genocide in front of them. They're also educating themselves. They're also seeing it in front of them. People are connected to Palestinians and they're getting information. So I think it's a combination of all of that. And I think this generation is, I look back on my generation and I think there were so few people who were activists, and I really get why it was so isolating. And it's overwhelming to see how many people. It's beautiful, and I don't think that we need to just let them have it. I think we all need to be participating in this movement. But yes, I think that's why.
The occupation, the demonstrations in the universities all across the states were well publicized. Were in all social media, etc. But I have seen only one demonstration in New York, when high school students actually came in with the university students and participate of the demonstration. Do you have more info about the participation of the high school students across the states, and what change this can make in the householdings? Because the university students are by themselves.
Right.
These people are in their house. So high school demonstrations in the States and its effect in the USA households.
Also such a great question. I mean, I'll just give a couple of examples. Even before, I wanted to say something I said that I didn't say before, which is, there are so many young people who are leading, participating, activating these demonstrations, and that many of them are also Palestinian. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that, there are Palestinians that are also leading this movement, and just that's also important, that people are trying to talk about their own lives, their families, their freedom. So in terms of high school, there's a couple things I can say. I mean, one of the high schools I know, so I was a teacher at a high school, and I went and I asked the I asked the head of the school if I could come in and just say, if y'all are not talking about it, since I teach Middle East history here, I'd be happy to come in and just answer questions. And it was probably a month after October 7th. I said they could ask anything. It could be faculty. The entire high school was invited, all the faculty. And it was one of the most amazing in my life as an educator and as an activist on this. I thought, and they actually said, do you want us to introduce you as JBP also? I said, if you want to. That was surprising, but I was like, whatever you want. I mean, that's, it's part of who I am. So what was amazing about it is that every question was on, it was like my most Jewish self was there, or my most human self, my most, an educator that wanted to see a critical relationship with information, where people were exploring what they didn't know, where they weren't afraid to ask questions, where anything was possible, and they were getting context and information, and they could ask for more. And then as a result of that, even though that went well, and so many people said, thank you for doing that, and it was so powerful, and please come back. I was invited back at that moment. That the next thing I knew, that school wasn't offering me a contract to continue my 9 years of teaching there because of the pressure they were getting elsewhere. And this is also a place where I remember being in school, and I said, you're so lucky you're in a school where some people can't teach critical race theory, and we can talk about critical race theory here in our class. So that's one situation. I want to give another where I have a high schooler, and literally everything has been silenced. No conversation about it. No ability to have critical dialogue. No education. Literally silence. Because the minute that the school even opened up the door to say, we are the combination of what happened on October 7th and what was happening to Palestinians afterward by the Israeli military was so horrific. The school tried to just make a statement that recognized everyone's humanity. It was the first time in my life as an activist and a scholar where I was like, thank God they're not saying details. Just thank God, just no details. They're just saying, let's recognize each other's humanity. This is a moment where we have to pay attention to it. And the school got slammed. The head of the school got slammed. The school got threatened. So that force of shutting people down in a place where you're supposed to inquire, you're supposed to learn how to critically think. That's literally the goal in high school. And then I'll give a third situation, which is, and these are all in the context of where I live. I can't speak to what is happening around the country, so I'm going to be specific. I had parents of a young person call me. He's in high school, and he was basically trying to figure out how to do a walkout and a demonstration motivated by the demonstrations all over the universities. And they were worried because the school was already kind of putting him on parents who were saying, they were thinking that he was connected to a terrorist organization. A Jewish kid who wanted to just demonstrate and have a walkout. So that's the environment that we're in. And in this idea, if you talk about Palestine, that somehow you're anti-Semitic. If you talk about if you claim you're anti-Zionist, that somehow you're anti-Semitic, which are all false notions, which they are, they're used as a vehicle to shut down people being able to be critical and advocate for justice and care about humanity. And really in this genocide.
And on top of this, there is the media system. How this impact in this struggle? What can you make to fight in this situation?
So, I mean, it's related to your question of like, why there's so many young people involved. Like, young people are not listening to mainstream news organizations. They could, they're like, what? Like, there are TV stations that still exist, which good for them. I mean, I can say, not as a young person, that I only pay attention to independent media. I will look at what's happening with the other media, whether it's, sort of mainstream or even right wing, to hear what they're saying until I get sick enough to say, okay, like, I know the story. So I do think that and it depends, when you ask about the party lines, about where people are, what they're listening to, I think it does depend. I think, there are many people in political elected officials who do still pay attention to mainstream media, and they aren't connected. I'm in shock. I actually am in shock that Al Jazeera has not been one of the places that every member of Congress has been attached to, or like Democracy Now!, The Intercept, Drive Site, all these Mondoweiss, these 972, all these spaces that actually can tell you exactly what's coming on the ground. Or the fact that like there have been no journalists, all the journalists that have been killed, which is horrific, in Gaza and in the West Bank, and at the same time, and in Lebanon, and at the same time not be able to, that the journalists that are there are these independent journalists or journalists with Al Jazeera. So I think it's, as someone who really is an independent media person and who believes that we're supposed to be critical of the state, and who's, believes that we're supposed to ask all the questions. I don't exactly know how someone consumes the information that is not independent, if they're questioning it or not.
Great. And what do you think all this demonstration and all this debate, what the impact it can have in the presidential election, if any?
I think that's what we're in that moment now. Everyone is trying to use this, who folks who are in support of Palestinian liberation, people who are in support of all the progressive causes that creates a world of justice that is within the framework of human rights and civil rights, and an imagination that goes beyond militarized and police security, safety within our communities, internationally and here. I think this is the moment where, like I said, there is a possibility for a sea change, something massive to shift within the United States. I remember watching what was happening in France and thinking, oh my God, when it really swung to the right, and then thinking, oh my God, this is really a nightmare, like not another place. And then it swung left, and I was like, oh my God, this is like anything is possible. And I know this happens. We've seen it happen here. I think in our lifetime, we've never been on the precipice of something that meant so much. And I think that if Kamala Harris is the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, that the Democratic Party really has got to, they have to shift, or it will be a horrible, it's going to be horrible. We already thought it was going to be horrible, but we're living in a time where we have, Trump, who wants to create a dictatorship, and he's been very open about it. And Project 2025, which is clearly already taking place to dismember and I can't even figure out the word I want to say, but every part of our lives, even women's bodies, for us to be able to, for people to have autonomy over their body, every aspect of our body, for trans people to be absolutely erased, for as many people as possible to be expelled who have been living in this country for decades. It's like an impossible moment where I think, how on earth can people inside not be thinking, we really have to do something to change this, because the end result could be so much worse than what we can even imagine. And we already know what bad things did happen with the Trump administration the first time. And we see people like Netanyahu, who's, the drive for power at every cost, at human lives, at decimating Gaza, at breaching every international law, at ignoring even his own people who are desperate to get their loved ones home. There really is no choice other than to make a good choice, which is to end this nightmare.
Some compare the fight, the Palestinian fight, the fight that has happened in the South Africa. Do you believe this is a comparison that you can make, and what lessons can the activists of the Palestinian and the ceasefire and the stop genocide can learn from the South Africa fight?
That's a great question. I think that's been so at the heart of how even the Palestinian civil society that first called for actively boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel until the three requirements were met. The one of ending the occupation, full rights for Palestinians in 48, and a right of return. So I think that idea of the boycott history was connected to the South African movement. There are certainly people here in the US, especially African Americans and Black folks, who are part of these movements who look to apartheid South Africa and the movements to boycott, divest, and also what that's looked like over time. I think the other thing is I've also heard South African activists say that the situation, the occupation, and now with the genocide, is way worse than what apartheid was. And it's not to, again, I'm one of those people also where I'm like, this is not an oppression Olympics. I'm sure nobody's saying that. But when you have people who lived under apartheid who's saying that their experience looking and witnessing and seeing what's happening in the occupation, that it is worse, that should give us some pretty critical information about ending it. The other thing I wanted to say is, if people hadn't seen the film, it's a roadmap to apartheid, and it literally shows side by side. And this is before this genocide started. So, but it's worthwhile seeing because they really show side by side how much they're supported. And Israel also supported the apartheid regime. I mean, Israel has been sadly, Israel has, it's so hard. This is when I'm like, please disassociate Israel as a Jewish state. Just see it as a state like any other state. The state of Israel has certainly exported militarism. It's happened in Brazil. It's happened in places all over the world. And so this I have so many thoughts in my head, but I guess I'll just say this part. I'm thinking about how Jewish folks who somehow either are still on the fence, silent, or supporting this genocide or the occupation, or who still don't know, or who are in denial about it, or who are not seeing what we're seeing, or who are refusing to look, I think are really, if they are stuck in a space where they believe that militarism and exporting that kind of unsafety and control over Palestinians and around the world, to other communities, so that other countries can do that to other communities, I think that they need to take a really long look at themselves and say that is not how Jewish people have survived around, all these centuries. It is not to brutalize and support the brutalization of other people. That is not how people survive. It's just not.
Great. Ilisse, we'd like to thank you very, very much for your time, bringing some important information about this struggle and the actions of this Jewish movement in the States. And também agradecemos a participação de todo o pessoal que está aqui com a gente, acompanhando ao vivo essa conversa. Lembrando a todos que essa entrevista fica disponível em todos os canais TUTAMÉIA. É só buscar por TUTAMÉIA TV e você nos encontra nas várias plataformas de podcast, no Twitter, no Facebook, no YouTube. No YouTube, não deixe de se inscrever no nosso canal, clicar na sinetinha para receber avisos de novos vídeos. Você também pode participar do grupo no WhatsApp, o grupo Amigos do TUTAMÉIA, para receber informações sobre nossas reportagens e entrevistas. O link de convite para esse grupo está disponível na descrição deste vídeo. E agora, então, antes das despedidas, a gente vai voltar a palavra para a nossa entrevistada, para que ela mande sua mensagem. Now, just before the goodbye, good night, we'd like to give you the word so that you can send your message to the Brazilian people. What are you thinking about all this, what's happening?
Thanks for the opportunity to do that. I guess, I mean, I think I said all the things I believe about what should happen now with that the U.S. and anybody who could be sending arms to Israel, it needs to stop immediately. That it's clear that and that Jewish people who identify as anti-Zionist, non-Zionist, who don't even identify that way, who are for freedom and justice, are on the side of Palestinians. And that I'm also just thinking about what's happening in the West Bank right now, the fact that there's so many settlers and settler violence against really driving Palestinians off of their lands, which is happening at unprecedented rates, even while internationals are trying to support Palestinians to stay on their land. And I guess I just want to say, like, it is, I can be here feeling strong. It's also like heart-wrenching and absolutely heartbreaking to be a Jewish person whose family also was decimated during World War II. And, you know, being survivors of families like that, the whole not in my name, like, it is really true. It's not in my name. It is so hard to be part of a country that's funding the genocide and have a state that calls itself Jewish that is genociding another people when it goes against every cell in my body and in our bodies. And that's why you're seeing Jewish people show up. That's why we're, you know, desperate with grief and at the same time just trying to do as much as we can. So I implore anyone who is on the fence, who is not active, who wants to get active, to make whatever steps you need to support ending this genocide. And I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Pessoal, goodbye. Tchau, pessoal. Até mais.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.